Okay, you're good.
Good morning.
Morning.
Can you hear us in Albany?
Yes, sir.
All right, we can hear you too. This is wonderful. Well, good morning, everyone. I believe everyone has a copy of the agenda in front of them, and we do have a quorum. This is our December 2017 meeting of the Commission on Forensic Science. The first matter we have on the agenda is a review and approval of the meeting agenda. So before we make a motion, is there any discussion or any issue anyone wants to raise? Marvin?
Yeah. With respect to today's agenda, I see that we have a session on executive session planned. And just so for the public record, I'm aware of what the executive session is about, the subject matter, as are other members of the Commission. The last meeting of the Commission, I objected to the use of executive session for this matter. And I will continue that objection through today. I believe that the subject matter of the meeting behind closed doors in executive session should be in public session. I don't believe that executive session should be invoked under Executive Law 995A if there's an appropriate reason or topic for that. And to that end, I would ask that when we get to that portion of the meeting that we not have executive session. That's my objection. I note it for the record.
Just for the record, I did receive a letter from you yesterday that, among other things, raised this issue, and I believe footnote 1. I disagree with the factual characterization in footnote 1 about the reasons that I indicated last time why we handled this in executive session. And I'll indicate again, my understanding that this matter relates to a potential investigation by the Inspector General, and that historically we've always handled matters like that in executive session, and feel it's appropriate to continue that practice and do so here. And certainly if anyone else has anything to add, they're welcome to. If not, then I would ask if we have a motion to approve the agenda as presented. And do we have a second? All in favor of the agenda? And any opposed? Thank you. The next item we have is a review and approval of the draft minutes from our September 13th, 2017 meeting. And again, I believe those have been distributed to everybody prior to the meeting. Do we have any comment or discussion with regard to those minutes? And if not, do we have a motion to approve the minutes of the September 13th, 2017 meeting? Scott, do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Anyone opposed?
I abstain.
Okay.
Me too.
I wasn't there.
The next item we have on the agenda under number 4, the accreditation and laboratory updates. Brian, do you want to go through the accreditations?
Sure. So within your binders are the materials that's already been distributed. The first item is the DCGS latent print laboratory. Some notifications. No vote is required for any of the items on the accreditation agenda today. But on pages 7 through 27 are documents received related to that laboratory. If anyone has questions, I believe there's a representative in the Albany location.
With regard to the lab director, I can indicate that we are in the process of hiring a new director. It's just the state process and paperwork we go through right now that is the reason why the person actually isn't in place right now, but there will be a lab director there soon.
Okay. If there's no other questions about the DCGS latent print lab, the next is the Monroe County Crime Laboratory, documents in your binder 28 to 29, and there's also an additional document in the materials that are in front of you today, 29.1. So if you look at the top with the blue letters on the bottom, blue numbers on the bottom, it's just an additional document we received recently related to that. It has to do with the Monroe County Laboratory and the scope for digital evidence. So if anyone has any questions, we can reach out to the lab director. I'm not sure if they're in Albany. They're in Albany?
Yes, they're in Albany.
Okay. If there's no questions for Monroe County, the next laboratory is the Nassau County Division of Forensic Services, pages 30 through 37 in your binder. and you can go through and take a peek at those documents. And obviously, Dr. Buffalino is here, as well as other members of his lab, if there is any questions or any follow-up needed. Okay, if there's no questions, the New York City Police Department Laboratory, pages 40 to 55. Did I skip one?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. New York City Department of Forensic Biology. Yep, thank you. Pages 38 to 39, and then additionally 39.1 through 39.4. So within the initial bound binders, and then also within the additional documents you received. Any questions for the New York City Medical Examiner's Office? Okay, sorry, the New York City Police Department Laboratory, pages 40 to 55 of your binders. Some changes in management and things of that nature. And we've got representatives from the lab here available if there's any questions. Okay. The New York State Police Lab, pages 56 through 59 in your binders, a change in scope from one of their laboratories. An examiner in the Western Regional Laboratory was a trace examiner, retired, so they are not going to offer that service out of that laboratory anymore.
Why aren't they going to replace that person?
There's someone from the lab that can address it if you'd like, but essentially they've centralized services to the Albany location. So this was a service that was offered in the regional laboratory, so they're not going to replace it in the regional laboratory, but in the central. But if you have no directors in Albany, if necessary.
Is Ray in Albany?
Yes. Ray. It's all right.
Good morning, Ray.
Good morning. So Ray Wickenheiser, representing New York State Police, the crime lab. So what happened there was we were offering trace evidence out of both our Western Satellite Crime Lab in Olean, New York, and out of the FIC in Albany, with just one examiner out in Olean. That's Mr. Ron Stanbro. He retired after a lengthy, time of excellent service. So just given the distribution and how much it takes economically to keep two labs running, we just decided to consolidate the services. The same services are offered. We would just do all of that out of Albany as opposed to having the two locations. And that requires a change of scope.
Can I ask one question, Ray, just out of curiosity? So on the page 58, it's the ANAB scope of accreditation, and under biology, it has individual characteristic database. I'm just curious what that is.
I believe that would be referring to our data bank itself. So
Estes? Or
the actual entirety of the database, the fact that we are operating a database, so that represents individual characteristics, as in like the DNA profiles.
Okay.
So that's included in the scope.
Okay.
That's what they call it.
DNA
data
based.
bank.
Yeah. Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you.
Next laboratory is the Onondaga County Center of Forensic Science Laboratory. They have a off-site evaluation, and they receive a continuation of accreditation. The lab is available via phone if there's any questions. Okay. Next laboratory is the Suffolk County Crime Laboratory. So there was a reassessment audit with updates and conformance documents. Starts in your binder on page 68, goes to 193, and then if you look in your additional documents that you received today, from 193.1 to 193.22 with the blue on the bottom. And we have members of Suffolk here in the New York location if there's questions.
Who is here from Suffolk, Bob?
Nope, we have Dan Burhans, Connie Dinkle, members of the biology section.
If I can, maybe we could just come up for a minute. Okay. As I'm reading this, there was a number of I believe like 5 findings.
Yeah, 5.
And if I'm reading it right again, indicates that you've put together a proposed plan or resolution as to how you're going to deal with those. Maybe you could just give us an update, in terms of where you are with that plan.
Sure. We had five. First of all, I apologize for Bob's absence. He's not feeling well today. We had 5 findings in total for the full assessment. 2 of which were in the trace evidence section. Both of those, the action plans, have been accepted and approved, and now we're just awaiting casework so that we could submit that as objective evidence. But that one is finished. We had 1 in the drug chemistry section. The action plan has also been approved, and we have submitted objective evidence already, so that one's closed out. We had 2 in the DNA section, the first being a training finding, which we have the action plan already approved, and all the objective evidence has been submitted and approved for that. And we just completed our mixture interpretation finding. The action plan was accepted, and we anticipate getting to our lead assessor the objective evidence by the end of next week. And at the completion of that, our lead assessor will compile all of her data and forward it on to A&AB.
All right, and then is there a process where we be notified or, okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, as I understand, the problem with the DNA was the fact that you had 3 different thresholds.
Correct.
Would you explain?
I will happily defer to my DNA section.
Oh,
Come on.
That's why we have 3
I'm Joe Galdi. I'm supervisor of the biological sciences section. And pardon my voice. What we had done based on our validation, we saw that there were issues with interpreting mixtures between our stochastic threshold of 500 RFUs and up to 1,000 RFUs due to peak height and balance. So what we initially did was establish a threshold of 1,000 RFUs, which we referred to as our mixture interpretation threshold, and said that the majority of the peaks that we saw had to be above this threshold in order for us to make an assessment and call a profile.
okay. And I read through all of that, and I understand your thinking on that. And your normal threshold, am I correct, is 250?
No, our stochastic threshold is 500.
But what's the third threshold?
That's our analytical threshold,
Which is?
115.
115.
Yes.
Okay. So if it's a single source, the peaks are above 115, you would say that was you would report that.
Correct.
And then why is there a analytical threshold and a stochastic threshold? Why isn't it just a stochastic threshold, period?
Well, the analytical threshold allows you to determine what's a true peak. The stochastic threshold, the purpose of that is to determine if you have at a particular locus just one peak, is it really a homozygote or is there the possibility it's something dropped out? So if we have a single peak that's over 500 RFUs, we feel comfortable stating that that's a true homozygote. If we have a single peak under 500 RFUs, then there's the possibility that there's a sister peak that has dropped out.
Okay. Now, ANAB disagreed with your analysis, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. What I'm curious about is these 29 cases. Are you going to be the first witness for the defense if one of these 29 cases turns out results in the arrest of a rapist or a murderer?
Well, what happened was we were calling profiles inconclusive, and the reason why we were doing that is we were concerned about making incorrect calls.
They were below 1,000.
Correct.
So I'm assuming that these 29 cases go into that netherland between 500 and 1,000?
Correct.
Okay. So do you know if the Suffolk County DA's office is pursuing arrest in any of those cases? Or?
Some of them there are, and some of them there are no suspect cases. And what we're doing is, now that we've made revisions to our manual, we're in the process of reevaluating those profiles. Some of those profiles that were originally called inconclusive may turn out to have results that we'll be able to call.
I have no ulterior motive for asking this question. I'm just curious. I mean, would you plan on testifying or that these are valid results, or would you say No, they're not. Let ANAB can come in here and say they're valid. I don't think they are.
Well, when we reevaluated this process and came up with what we're using now, based on our validation, we feel comfortable that whatever calls we're going to make when we reassess these are correct calls.
And in all of this give and take, that is in these dozens and dozens of pages, obviously will be provided to the defense attorney, so he or she can explore that with you.
It's available, yes. It's a matter of public record, yes.
Okay.
Go ahead. Marvin?
Yeah, so let me just segue into that last part of Bill Fitzpatrick's comments. With these 29 cases, in those instances where you called it inconclusive, you're going to go back. Is that correct?
Correct. If we called it inconclusive because
Right.
of this particular issue, the threshold of under 1,000.
So somewhere in the lab, there's a report where you did an analysis and it came out inconclusive, correct?
Correct.
And that's in a case file somewhere, right?
Yes.
Now you may go back and let's just take a hypothetical, take a look at it, and now it's not inconclusive. You were able to, correct?
Correct.
So when that happens, aside from the fact that documents will be available, right? A document that says inconclusive will still be in the file. It won't be destroyed.
Correct.
Correct? And the document that says positive will go into the file, correct?
Correct.
Will there be a specific notice to the district attorney about that particular case? I would suspect you'd have to do that.
The DA's office was notified about every one of the cases.
Okay. Now, in the cases going forward where you had an inconclusive and now you make an identification, will you notify the defense attorney?
Well, the defense attorney receives all the documents sent over to the prosecution.
Right. That's not what I'm asking about. Where you find the difference, you affirmatively and assertively notify the DA. Look, you're the law enforcement agency. We had an inconclusive. You didn't arrest anybody based on that. But now we're telling you we've found somebody. We've made a comparison, right? You'd have to do that. Otherwise, how would the DA act, correct?
Correct.
Right. Do you call the defense attorney? Or is your position here today, just so I understand it, no, we've done our homework. We've told the prosecutor. The papers are in there. It's up to the defense attorney to find them. Is that basically what's going on?
Well, again, all the paperwork gets forwarded to the defense attorney by the prosecutor. We don't necessarily have the information on a defense attorney on these cases.
Right, but you
either.
could get it, right?
I'm not sure if we can.
Is it a matter of public record in Suffolk County?
I honestly don't
Assuming
know.
there's an attorney on these cases.
Right.
You're assuming there's been an arrest.
That's right. And
in all these cases have a
let's
suspect.
clarify that.
Well,
In
but-
cases,
well, hang on, Marvin.
yeah.
The problem I have here is, we've got a set of laws that deal with who has to make notification, when discovery has to be turned over, who has to do it, who has an obligation to turn Brady material over.
Right.
I allowed you to ask the question. I think they answered, but I think there could be a view of your question where you're trying to transfer Brady responsibility from where the law places it onto the lab, and I don't think that's
Well-
really fair to folks. You asked the question,
Right.
It's even
they
more
gave you an answer.
It's even more than that. You're not suggesting that, Joe's got to call up the defense attorney and say, hey, look, this would be a really good line of cross-examination. when I
No, we're not
testify.
suggesting that. I think, first of all, Mike, you're incorrect on the law. The law in New York State is that any entity that can be reasonably expected to be part of the prosecution team and prosecution investigation, and laboratories have been found to be such an entity, they come under the Brady rule.
Yeah, but
That's the
that
prosecutor's
doesn't require them to reach directly out to the defense attorney and provide information to the defense attorney.
Well-
It provides and requires that if there's exculpatory material, that it's made available, and the obligation is on the prosecution.
Right.
So, without arguing over the finer points of Brady with you here, at the end of the day, if there's Brady material and the prosecution chooses to bring a case based on the work that the laboratory does, it's incumbent on the prosecution under our law to get all that Brady material, turn it over.
I
I think the relevant question from my perspective, the folks at the lab here, is do you document all of this stuff that you've described to us within each case file? And in the event there's a prosecution and there's a request made for your case file, do you turn all of that over to whoever it is they ask for your case file, the judge, the court, whoever it might be?
Yes.
And in addition to the reanalysis report going into each case file, we will be sending up a follow-up memo to the DA's office listing the results for each of the cases that we've identified in this. So they'll have two forms of identification.
Judge?
The chief judge of the state recently issued a new directive to all judges in New York State presiding over criminal proceedings that they have to direct the people to do what's called open file discovery. So at the beginning of the proceeding. So that has really obviated a lot of these Brady issues and other problems with discovery. Everything has to be turned over with the exception of witnesses' names, obviously, and identifying information of witnesses.
Thank you. Yes, Marvin.
I won't comment except to say, Judge, that obviated is a very strong term. I don't think the new order from the courts are going to obviate the severe Brady problem we have in New York State. But putting that aside for a moment, I just want to be clear in my own mind in your laboratory, and something that you said just a moment ago. You'll generate a reanalysis report certainly when there's been a reanalysis that comes out with a different conclusion than the original conclusion, whether it's inconclusive, negative, positive, correct?
Yes.
All right. That reanalysis report goes into the case file. So here's my question, because this just comes up at almost every meeting. Is there one case file for the case? Is that how it works?
Yes.
And this reanalysis report will be in that case file. We're not talking, just so we're clear, we're not talking about a reanalysis report that ends up in the file of the quality assurance manager, ends up in one section chief's file and not in the case file. Because we wouldn't want a situation where the defense attorney, right, who hasn't been notified by the DA or you felt you've done your job by telling the DA, but the DA may not have told the defense attorney, so that the defense attorney says to you, I want to see the case file, right? It will have this reanalysis report.
There is no separate.
No
there's
separate.
no separate case file that's in any other location of the laboratory other than where the case files are held. That's it.
That's very helpful to me. One last question. How many sections does the lab have? You have a lot. I mean, you're one of the biggest labs in the state.
5 discipline sections
Right.
plus crime scene section.
5 disciplines, but you do more than 5 disciplines
Oh, we
in
do
the
have-
lab.
Absolutely.
Like 20, I think.
Yeah.
It's pretty high. But regardless of that, the 20 disciplines that are actually done and the other undertakings that you take, regardless of that, all of these reanalyses of DNA will go into one file.
Right.
Yes.
So if I go out to Suffolk County and I speak to the defense bar out there and I say to them, you can get this reanalysis report. You don't have to depend upon the DA and their Brady function. You look at the case file and you'll see a reanalysis report.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Scott?
Thank you, Mike.
No, thank you, Marvin.
In regards to the validation you had mentioned just a couple of minutes ago, was there another validation done in the last couple of months, or this is you re-looked at the validation you did where you originally came up with the 1,000 level, and you looked at that and changed your opinion?
We went through the validation again and set up new rules. So the rules are more strict under 1,000. Our mixture ratio for separation is 1 to 2 above 1,000. So we looked at all the mixtures that created a problem and did 1 to 4 and see if all those profiles that had a problem doing validation would that solve it, and it did solve one of the aspects of it. And we looked at, because there's so much peak height imbalance, down to 20%. If we included those genotypes that are 20% and above, that will solve the other problem we had with it. And those are the rules that we put in there, I guess tougher rules to separate these mixtures.
So if I can understand, I'm not a DNA examiner, so when you did the validation, you had rules where you included the data, excluded the data, and that gave you this new level, this 1,000.
Well, if we use one set of rules, we wouldn't be able to evaluate everything under 1,000 because we'll get an incorrect answer.
Right.
So with these new rules.
That's what I'm saying. So, like, the reason you weren't using them because the rules you had in place would give you the incorrect answer. So you didn't want to give the wrong answer. So you.
That's correct.
But based upon what ANAB brought to your attention, you looked at the rules that you had in place during that validation, and you altered the rules. You know, as you just described, and that allowed you to resolve that problem of getting the incorrect answer. Correct.
That's correct.
So therefore, your validation material is your analysis. It hasn't changed really. It's the rules of your validation data that's allowed you now to get the right answer, which has allowed you to eliminate that 1,000 level.
That's correct.
Okay.
Those questions assume that the new rules are, as applied, fix the original problem.
That's correct.
Correct? And you satisfied yourself that the new rules that you put in place did that.
Yes.
Right.
We went back and looked at all the validation data that had a problem,
Right.
and it solved both those problems.
And in this particular instance, the validation that we're talking about, was it a software computer error?
No,
What was it?
this was just the new kits or more, I guess, has more problems with high balance. And we
Right.
use that for separation, so.
Right, so it wasn't a software computer glitch, right? Did you, just curious, and when doing these validations and putting in new rules, does your laboratory have expertise, people on staff who are experts in computer programming and software glitches?
No.
No, I didn't think, I think the answer is no, right? I mean, I knew the answer, I just wanted to hear it for the record, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I have a suggestion here.
Thank you.
You know, like Scott, I know even less about DNA probably than you, from at least the lab perspective. But it strikes me that, at least from my comfort level, this would be something that the DNA subcommittee ought to take a look at. And just make sure that they have a comfort level with what you're doing and, you know, give us a recommendation. That's the body that is supposed to have the expertise here. And that's who we rely on. You've made a change. It seems to me to be reasonable at the next meeting to fill them in on what you're doing and have them let us, you know, give us their feedback on it.
Right, but that would, excuse me, that wouldn't quite solve the problem, would it? Because,
Well, I don't know that there's a problem.
well,
I'm not willing to concede there's a problem.
It wouldn't solve the process problem, because that particular lab, we now know that they made the change in their validation because they ran into a problem, and you're suggesting they let the DNA subcommittee know about it. But we don't know what the other 21 labs now that we have under our jurisdiction, what they're doing with these validation studies
Well,
when
this
they do
came up.
something. Maybe the answer is that the commission should enact a rule after getting some advice from the DNA subcommittee that whenever there's a validation study and you get an incorrect response, an incorrect answer, a mathematically impossible answer, that the rule should be that, number one, you should notify the Commission on Forensic Science, because that's a Brady problem.
Well, this came up, as I understand it, as a result of a and AB inspection, correct?
Yes.
And every lab that we deal with on a regular basis has these inspections. So if there's an issue, I've got to assume it's going to come up, and, you know, just like this one did, it's going to end up. I think my sense is we have a process in place already where if the issues like this exist, they will be uncovered, and this commission will be provided with the information. I think that's why we're here today talking about it. So I hear your concern, and it's a good concern, but I think the process we have in place already takes care of it.
What ANAB did was appointed a three-person panel to review that, am I correct?
That was when we appealed it, yes.
Yeah.
After ANAB pointed it out.
So it's,
Right.
to me, it's not a scientific issue, it's an accreditation issue, and there may be an overlap there, but
But just in terms of the fix that they've put in place, you know, do the DNA subject matter experts we have in place agree with the changes they've made? Do they feel they're reasonable?
except that ANAB appointed 3 DNA subject matter experts to look at it, and as I understand it, Joe, and forgive my familiarity if you don't mind me calling you Joe.
No problem.
You can call me Fitz, you can call me anything.
I do that?
Get lost. You have satisfied ANAB.
Correct.
Can I ask you a question? Basically, what you did was you had a test, and you felt that you wanted to be slightly more conservative in your decision making, so that you were basically not including things that maybe you could have because you chose a more conservative approach. Would that be fair?
Yes.
And then ANAB came in and said that you're being too conservative, you shouldn't do this, you need to fix it.
That's correct.
And then you fixed it to what ANAB wanted you to fix it to. You satisfied them.
Well, also satisfying ourselves that we were not making
That's the
incorrect
key.
calls.
That you you satisfied yourself based upon testing and stuff. The only other thing I would ask, is there any way in those 29 cases that you could include the correspondence between yourself and ANAB that we were given and make it part of the Rosario packet on those 29 cases? Do you see what I'm asking you? Because the conversation between you and ANAB and how it's explained and everything and what we were given, I think would be very beneficial and to satisfy any claims of Brady violations can I finish?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. That a prosecutor that might not be here or be familiar with what they wouldn't know about it. So you see what I'm saying? So if I'm not me, and I'm the DA in Suffolk County or an assistant DA in Suffolk County, I might not know about these documents to give them over, but I really think that these documents should be given to a defense attorney. So if you could include them in your packet that go with information you give on each case, I think that might help, close a door on any claim of Brady violation. Do you see what I'm asking? You hear what I'm asking?
Yes, I do.
Understand?
Yep.
Could you do that?
I don't see any issue with that. I don't know.
I actually don't know. I've never been asked that question before, so that's something that I could definitely look into.
Yes. It's unknown.
You see what I'm trying to get at, though? Because I think what's in here would be very important that a defense attorney get so that they could ask questions. Because I would suspect, I'll just give you a fact pattern, if we have somebody that you had initially ruled inconclusive on a identity, now you identify that person is now charged, I would suspect they're going to want to call somebody to testify and say, hey, wait a second, isn't it true that at one point in time you said this was inconclusive and why? And the information that's in here, at least if I was a defense attorney, would be very helpful for me to cross-examine you and ask you questions and get to the fact of what I was just asking you. You had a more conservative approach and then try to, convince a jury that more conservative approach was probably the right approach. I would assume that's what a defense attorney wants to argue. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I ask a question,
I'm
please?
sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
So when you initially challenged the finding by ANAB, was it based on the fact that you felt that you were still within your rights as a laboratory to be conservative, and that's the way you felt you needed to be, but then you said, all right, we'll consider what it is that you're complaining about, and we'll see what we can do that still makes us feel comfortable as a laboratory within the guidelines that you're complaining about? Am I stating that kind of sort of okay?
Yes, and what the initial finding was based on the quality assurance standard stating that they were claiming that this procedure that we put in place was not based on our validation, and we felt it was.
I see.
And so that was the basis of our filing the appeal.
I see. So what you've ultimately presented to us now, is it still based upon your validation, however you've taken into consideration their issues and have modified your approach so that you can maybe get more information from some mixtures that you weren't able to do previously?
That's correct.
And the initial mixture protocol that you had in place, how long had you been using that within the laboratory?
We went online with this kit on April 1st of
So
this
it's
year.
brand new.
Correct.
So this is this is less than a year
Yes,
that this has been in place.
correct.
And would it be fair to say that, aside from the fact that you had ANAB come in to discuss this issue, that you yourselves as scientists, as you moved along in using this new technique, that you could have arrived at that same conclusion yourself, that you started out super conservative and said, oh, gee, as we learn how to use this as a laboratory, that we would make these changes organically on our own without needing someone else to come and tell us to do it.
We were headed in that direction,
Okay.
yes.
Have you had to institute any additional training or retraining or tweaking based on the changes that you've made to the interpretation?
Yes, we had meetings with the staff, a total of 6 hours worth of meetings, and then a competency test that each person had to pass prior to using the revised procedures.
So now this is also taking into account that you were changing to a multiplex with more loci, correct?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. So, if I can make a statement rather than a question, this is something that we deal with on a pretty frequent basis as DNA laboratories, as we have to adjust to whatever we need to do with multiplexes or different systems that we bring on board. There's always going to be a period of adjustment, and I think that we all anticipate, all right, we're starting here, but we may need to adjust based on what it is that we're seeing. So it's not, in my mind, unusual at all as a fellow DNA scientist that this is something that you would naturally need to revisit on a particular basis. And the fact that it's only April to now, this is really a short period of time for the laboratory to become accustomed to using and implementing these new techniques. So I think I understand what is happening here. One other question. How many DNA analysts do you have?
We have a total of 8.
8, okay. So, and are all of them DNA interpreting analysts?
Yes.
Okay. So, does your laboratory work on a case from beginning to end? One analyst gets the case and they work it all the way through?
We have one analyst in the section who just does body fluid analysis. So that analyst may take a case, do the body fluid analysis, and then hand samples off to a DNA analyst for DNA analysis. In other cases, the DNA analyst will also do the body fluid analysis.
Do you feel that your analysts feel comfortable with coming and speaking with you to understand what the changes are, and that they're comfortable with whatever changes have been implemented?
It's been a learning process,
Okay.
and there's been a lot of discussions prior to implementing and as we've been implementing it. And we've made tweaks along the way, changing a sentence here, a paragraph there, until we got to the point that we feel people are more comfortable with it.
So, what was it, 29 cases that were affected by this?
Correct.
Okay, out of a total of how many cases?
Several hundred.
Several hundred. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Marvin?
I just want to go back to the discussion we had a few minutes ago about the posting in the file of the reanalysis report when you get a different conclusion than the one before. The additional documents that Scott McNamara was talking about, did you understand what he meant by additional documents?
Yes,
Right.
the documentation, the communication that we had with ANAB.
Right. Couldn't those documents be stapled to the reanalysis report?
Yeah, I don't see why
Right.
it couldn't be. I just
Right.
need to look into how
Right.
that
I mean,
happened.
it seems to me that's the logical way to go. If I, as a defense attorney, come to your lab and you voluntarily let me look at the file, or I subpoena the file, whichever way it happens, the most logical place to have these documents with ANAB would be the reanalysis report. After all, that's what caused the reanalysis, right? So it would be no problem with that. I mean, I'm glad you're going to look into it. I assume you'll get back to us with a short letter and say, we've looked into it, it's not a problem, it just may increase the staple budget, but other than that, we're okay, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so you can just write us a letter at some future date?
That would be
That
probably
okay?
coming from-
I may be overstepping my bounds, Mike, but
Yep.
that's what I would
Okay.
request.
I would agree with your request.
This will be on the
Great.
agenda for the.
Thank you
February
very
meeting
much.
subcommittee.
You're welcome.
I just had one last thing. Just so regarding the subcommittee, and not that I'm against sending anything to the subcommittee, but I mean, based upon what I was given in the late documents or combined, that file named late documents combined. So you basically got rid of that second level. So your minimum interpretation threshold, or I guess your third level, is gone, and it's substituted your ST, your stochastic. So now you just have an AT and a MIT at this point.
And an ST.
And an ST.
And an ST, sorry. So I mean, essentially, based upon what they provided, they're now conforming to both A and AB and the QAS document. So as far as I'm concerned, I think they're in the right direction.
I agree with Pat.
The only comment I have to make is if you have greater than a 65% heterozygosity, between 500 and 1,000, you might want to investigate the kit that you're using. And I'm not going to make the name of the kit that you're using public, but that sounds like it might be an issue. You know, again, as I'm not here to say one company is better than the other, but between 500 and 1,000, if you're getting a 65% heterozygosity I'm not saying down to picograms, but you might have it might be a kit that you might want to reinvestigate.
The instrument we're using is the 3500, so the peak heights are different from a 3130.
Right.
That's any consideration.
Well, I think we're all at 3500 now at this point.
But at that level, usually it's the 125 picogram, which is in the low end zone.
Okay.
So you do expect that.
Right, so I would imagine you, regardless of what kit you're using, you're going to have that same at that level. But
So they should use a different kit.
At that low,
No.
you're always going to have
No.
that type of heterozygosity. But around, you should be somewhere around 65, 70%.
Okay.
But at around picogram concentrations, then obviously there's always other factors involved. And I understand why you were so conservative, and I understand why AA and B said, look, you're losing information here, but I think you're handling it properly. So I don't, in terms of having to get another.
Yeah, no, I withdraw that request.
This material will naturally go to the DNA subcommittee in February, and they will approve it and give a binding recommendation for accreditation before the commission sees it again at the next meeting, which is, I believe, in March.
So essentially it's happening.
It's automatically happening.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So the next laboratory is the Westchester County Department of Labs and Research, Forensic Toxicology. We have representatives at the laboratory here if needed. Within the binder, page 194 to 204, and then some additional documents that were received a little bit later, 204.1 to 204.3, and the additional documents that were handed out or before the meeting in the last couple of days and are in front of you right now. So if anyone needs, we have the director of the laboratory here. Okay. If there's no questions on that, we're back to you for old business.
All right, so our first item under old business, we've been looking at the various options with regard to accreditation. And I think next on the agenda today is ABFT. I understand it, I believe we have Dr. Graham Jones and Dr. Bruce Goldberger here from ABFT, is that correct? So maybe you could come up and have a seat at the table. Maybe if you could just both introduce yourselves for everybody.
I'm Graham Jones. I'm chair of the ABFT accreditation program, and in my other life, chief toxicologist with the Medical Examiner's Office in Alberta in Canada.
I'm Bruce Goldberger, president of the ABFT and professor at the University of Florida College of Medicine.
So the commission is looking at, both the existing options that we use with regard to accreditation and also other potential options. And this is part of that process. So I guess to start with, I'll give you an opportunity to tell the commission anything you want to tell us about ABFT and about your process.
Yeah, by way of overview, ABFT started accrediting labs in North America in 1997. The program has obviously grown since that point. I think we're at 41 or 42 laboratories right now, 2 in Canada and the rest in the United States. Over that time period, because the program has grown, we've sought assistance from other organizations to give us administrative assistance. RTI, Research Triangle Institute in North Carolina, We had a contract with them for a number of years. And then we started talking to representatives from Asclad Lab to see if they would be willing to give us assistance, administrative assistance with our program. During the course of those discussions, Asclad Lab, as I understand it, became taken up into the ANAB or ANAB absorbed Asclad Lab, and we ended up with a cooperative agreement signed with ANAB in October of 2016. And that is an administrative arrangement at the present time where they're helping us with administrative issues with regards to the administration of the ABFT program. ABFT still makes the accreditation decisions for ABFT accredited laboratories. That agreement recognizes that eventually it's in the interest probably of forensic science, and certainly the direction that most forensic laboratories will be primarily accredited to a 17025 standard. And so the cooperative agreement states basically that by ABFT will only offer an accreditation program up until December 31st, 2020. So we have yet to work out the details, but we will not offer, ABFT will not offer an accreditation program, will not accredit a laboratory past December 31st, 2020. Part of the agreement with ANAB is that ABFT will work with ANAB to provide forensic standards over and above those in 17025. And so ANAB, in accrediting forensic toxicology laboratories, will have the option to accredit those laboratories, if those laboratories so choose, to primarily a 17025 standard with additional supplementary standards that are in the in the ABFT program right now that would not necessarily be covered in 17025. So moving past 2020, or whenever a laboratory decides to move to a 17025 accreditation, ABFT will make decisions regarding accreditation as far as forensic toxicology is concerned. Past that point, the ANAB will then make the accreditation decisions, and ABFT will serve in an advisory role if there are questions in the interpretation of the ABFT supplementary standards. And so ABFT will have an ongoing role in that advisory capacity and keeping the standards updated. So that's the situation as we currently see it.
So you're going out of business?
Not entirely.
But mostly.
It's been a very valuable course, I think, over the last few years. And ANAB is better suited to a growing population of accredited labs.
Mm-hmm.
ABFT still has an interest in maintaining the standards as far as forensic toxicology is concerned,
right.
But we will no longer be administering an accreditation program and focusing on certification activities instead.
Did you consider any other organizations besides ANAB?
Well, initially, as I said, we were looking at Asclad Lab primarily because Asclad Lab was very experienced in dealing with the accreditation of forensic laboratories, right, both toxicology and otherwise. We did talk initially to ANAB. We felt that the involvement of Asclad Lab gave us a better comfort zone, if you like, as far as their experience with forensics. As it turned out, we're working with ANAB as well, which is great. They have a lot of resources to assist us with.
Yeah, so there are only those two organizations
that we looked at.
Right.
We looked at another organization as well, but felt that other organization didn't have the same level of forensic experience
that you would have been satisfied with.
Correct.
Thank
you. Okay. Just to understand, so right now there's 17025. and ANAB has a supplemental requirements for forensics. Is your belief that ABFT with ANAB will be drafting supplemental requirements specifically for forensic toxicology laboratories, or do you think they'll be incorporated into the supplemental requirements for forensic laboratories, and then just evaluated like not applicable?
The idea is that ANAB will offer and has offered to use the ABFT supplemental standards or the ABFT checklist as we now have it for existing laboratories. So there are laboratories in other states that have a 17025 accreditation, either through ASCLD Lab or directly with ANAB, and that as time goes on, if some of those 17025 accredited laboratories wish to additionally adopt the ABFT standards, then ANAB will offer that to those laboratories. So in essence, there'll be two paths for a laboratory in state X, that they can just continue to go with the ANAB standards or 17025 alone, or they could decide to go with 17025 plus the ABFT supplementary standards, and that would be recognized as a stated part of their accreditation that they meet those additional standards.
So, I mean, if my recollection is correct, a number of years ago, forensic toxicology laboratories were able to choose whether to go through the ASCLD Lab model or the ABFT model. And I think, if not all of the labs, chose to continue with ABFT because they felt there was definite value in the way it's specific to toxicology. But if it sounds if by 2020, then those laboratories should be starting now to get ready to go for, I would assume, 17025 with ABFT supplemental requirements. And I think that's a significant change for a number of the laboratories. The other thing I just want to point out, ASCLD Lab just changed the supplemental requirements for forensics. So I'd be wondering what their timetable is for forensic toxicology. And also 17025 just recently been issued. So that's going to be changing also. So there's a lot of changes coming in the next couple of years. And I think there really needs to be some communication from probably NICLAC with DCGS, with ANAB, in regards to what their scheduling is, so we can give guidance to the lab directors what the commission would be expecting to do. I know that's what we're having this conversation, but it just seems that a lot of the forensic tox labs now need to get ready for 17025. And I know ABFT has elements of it because it's in the comparison, but there was more to ABF 17025 than just that.
No, I think those are good points. I think there's a number of other things. For example, I don't know when these additional standards will be developed. But I think we're going to need to look at those and get input from the labs and make a decision as a commission as to our comfort level with the ANAB structure, with the additional standards. Marvin?
I was going to suggest something far more radical than just, let's get the labs to get ready and talk it up, but rather to have the commission, now that it's been informed by the leadership of ABFT that they're going out of business on date X, and we're 3 years away, that the commission wants to know from each of the labs what procedures they are going to undertake now to be ready for this change.
Well, I think more basic than that, it seems to me we need to decide what we as a commission are going to require of the labs. In the past, we've given them the option, of ABFT or ANAB. So are we going to basically continue on that course? And if ABFT doesn't exist, say your option is ANAB.
Or something else?
Are we going to do ANAB plus any additional standards that ABFT may promulgate for ANAB? I think there's something else as part of this process we need to decide on. So
how do we do that? How do we do that?
I think in part the reason one of the reasons we embarked on this process is so that we could revisit the whole issue of, are we comfortable, with our initial decision, predating me, of getting all the initials mixed up here, ASCLD Lab and ABFT, which is now ANAB and ABFT, which apparently in the future that second option is going away. So I think at some point, probably the next meeting, now that we've had a chance to hear from all of the providers and, I think received some information that certainly I didn't anticipate, I think our next step is to sit down and discuss as a commission, what do we see as the path forward for all of our labs, for, our tox labs, for our non-tox labs, are we comfortable? Do we want to stay with ANAB for all of the other labs? What do we want to do? I think all those things are on the table, and I think, the reason, at least in my mind, one of the reasons for this process was for us to make decisions about that. I am curious, though, what is the timeline in your mind as you look at it, for the development of any of these additional standards that might go with the accreditation of a forensic tox lab?
Well, just to clarify, the standards actually exist right now. They're basically what the ABFT accreditation program is, so the standards are there. The standards may change a little bit simply because there may be existing 17025 standards that make the ABFT standard obsolete. So those ABFT standards may decrease in number somewhat because of the incorporation of 17025 or being accredited additionally to 17025. The challenge for the laboratories that are currently ABFT accredited is probably going to be more the additional standards, some of which are management-based standards and administrative standards that are in 17025. So the labs should be fairly well prepared for the toxicology, the forensic toxicology standards. It's the additional 17025 standards that they need to prepare for additionally.
And those ones just changed.
If I'm hearing you right, you're saying that basically what you're talking about is taking the existing ABFT standards for forensic toxicology labs, the ANAB standards, looking at where the ABFT standards add something to the existing ANAB, and that would be basically your add-on?
That's a fair summary, yes.
I would just...
Mike?
Sorry.
Yes, Ann. I'm sorry.
Just to clarify, under this new relationship between ABFT and ANAB, is it anticipated that labs have a choice, that a forensic tox lab can do the ANAB alone, or they can add ABFT alone, or they can do ABFT on top of ANAB? And do you anticipate the supplemental ABFT standards as adding an additional accreditation cost? If the lab can go be a forensic tox lab as ANAB alone, then adding ABFT, is that going to be an additional accreditation fee?
Who are you asking?
I'm
asking me?
No, I'm asking ABFT's representative, do they anticipate labs continuing to pay an ABFT fee if they choose to add the supplemental standards? Or are all forensic tox labs under ANAB eventually going to be doing the supplemental standards and paying ANAB? I'm just confused.
As far as the laboratories, ABFT laboratories that are not in New York State, they will have a choice as to whether they want to stay with ANAB without the ABFT standards, or to go with ANAB plus the ABFT standards, or if they so wish another 17025 accreditation program. They will have that choice. As far as the additional cost of going with ABFT, there will be some additional cost, but it should be relatively small. I can't give you an exact number, but it would be of the order of $500 to $1,000 a year, probably closer to 500 at the moment. And the reason why the cost is relatively small is because ABFT will not be paying the cost to go into the laboratory. Part of that will be covered by the ANAB accreditation fee. As far as
But New York
State
labs
goes-
have that choice now. They can be a forensic tox lab through what was ASCLD lab, or they can be a forensic tox lab through ABFT
Correct.
in New
And
York.
Yes, and it's up to the commission as to what they would deem acceptable.
Okay.
Forensic toxicology.
I was just going to say, just for the next meeting, is just if we could get an idea of what ANAB is considering, because like I said, ANAB would evaluate a laboratory with 17025, and then they have the forensic science supplemental requirements, which are in reality the ASCLD lab supplemental requirements. And it sounds like there's going to be forensic toxicology supplemental requirements. I think for ease for us reading material, and maybe for the lab directors, that those would be one supplemental requirements for forensic testing rather than two different avenues. But again, that would be more work now for the forensic toxicology laboratories, because the supplemental requirements for forensic science are there or not there sometimes, if that makes sense. So just there's different avenues they're branching off, which would be interesting if that's their goal, because it would help us make a decision on what we want.
Yeah, so if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like one of the things we want is to get some clarification from ANAB as to, what their intent is here, get something from them as to what.
With the supplemental requirements for the
Yes,
forensic
that we can
toxicology.
look at them and see whether or not,
Yeah.
and honestly, I think we probably want to get feedback from the lab directors as well, and then look at them as a commission and see if we think they accomplish our goals and accomplish them in a way that's not unduly burdensome to the labs.
Mike, we have the Vice President of ANAB here, and she's willing to address it if you'd like.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be great.
Pam Sale.
Maybe if you could just introduce yourself again for folks.
Yes, I'm Pam Sale, and I'm the Vice President of Forensics for ANAB.
I
So,
think we're having one organization.
I understand what you're saying about having one set of requirements, but it's actually, we are already running this program and allowing laboratories the choice to add the ABFT supplement. They will, ANAB's accreditation requirements that are above and beyond 17025 will remain one document. The ABFT requirements will be a separate standard. Part of the reason is we're not required, if we put it into the ANAB accreditation requirements, that means every lab across the country that does forensic toxicology has to meet those requirements. And they're discipline specific. And so we are allowing laboratories to have that choice. Do they want to add that on for a minimal cost? Or do they just want to go with 17025 and the ANAB accreditation requirements? There is no option to go 17025 and just the ABFT requirements without meeting the ANAB accreditation requirements. ANAB will not accredit a forensic laboratory if they do not meet 17025 and ANAB's accreditation requirements. That is a package deal. So the ABFT standard can be added on in addition to that.
So I was following you then lost, and it's me. So if I don't, right now we have 17025, which is base, which everyone would have to meet. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
But that would be new for the toxicology lab directors. So that's something that we need to consider for our next meeting. So that 17025 would be the base. And then a non-forensic toxicology laboratory, so they don't do forensic toxicology, currently do ANAB supplemental requirements with 17025, correct?
Yeah, well, okay, so give me an example of the non-forensic toxicology laboratory, because we are accrediting forensic toxicology.
No, I know you
Yeah.
are, but what I mean is, sorry, let me rephrase it. If the laboratory only does forensic toxicology, then they're not doing those additional ANAB requirements currently. They're just going
Currently,
ABFT.
just ABFT,
Right.
correct.
So just to clarify, say I have a forensic toxicology laboratory, and that's the only thing I do. Right now I'm down ABFT, and I'm just trying to work out what options I would have in 2020. One option would be 7225 with ABFT requirements that you're now taking over, correct?
Plus the A&EB accreditation requirements.
Plus your supplemental?
Yes.
Yeah, so that,
Supplemental-
yeah,
the
okay, that makes
supplemental
perfect
is
sense. No, I understand.
included
No, I
all. Yeah.
understand. So so in my mind, it's the 7225, maybe it's just that, it's been a long day. 7225 plus A&EB requirements. Current forensic toxicology lab directors are meeting those through the ABFT program, but they're not all meeting those because they're not all covered in the ABFT program. So I think that is a significant. Now I need to speak to those lab directors and get their input as you mentioned, but it sounds like that's what A&EB is planning to do. That is what they're doing. So there's a significant amount of changes for forensic toxicology laboratories.
Can I just clarify something too? And I know when OFS was preparing the comparison of accreditation programs, Shelley from my office came up with a good analogy that 17025 is the foundation that all the houses eventually will have. If I'm interpreting it correctly and using that analogy, so there'd be 17025, every house would have the same foundation. The first floor would be the A&AB supplemental standards. Then it's a ranch house if it's Scott's lab, but it's a duplex if it's a tox lab, because they would have to have the foundation, the first floor, and now another set of standards on top.
Well, they wouldn't have to have that last set of standards by your requirements. So, now as a commission, we could decide whether or not we want to require that. But if I'm hearing you right, you're saying you're planning on offering different options to a lab. And
Right.
one option would be A&AB accreditation, which obviously includes the 17025. A second option would be the A&AB plus the additional, what right now are ABFT forensic tox standards. Is that accurate?
That's correct. And ABFT is going to be maintaining those standards, what those toxicology-specific requirements should be, and kind of equate it to how we also deal with the QAS document for DNA. We'll accredit a laboratory for DNA, but we have an agreement with the FBI that we will also include, those QAS requirements. Slightly different because the FBI is a regulator and you have to have those to be able to get access to ENDIS, but very similar in the fact that laboratories could choose not to do the QAS requirements, right? But they just wouldn't get access to ENDIS if they did that.
So I think, Scott, from my perspective, for the next meeting, one thing that would be helpful would be if you could talk with the lab directors and provide the commission with feedback from the lab's perspective on the value and the burdens associated with moving to the 17025 standard and the ANAB standard, which they don't do now. And then secondly, provide us with feedback in terms of this additional layer with regard to the what will be extra ABFT or tox requirements, which, as I understand it, are probably things they are meeting already.
Yes.
Because they're part of the current standard. But from a lab director's perspective, what's the value or burden in continuing those as well?
Mike?
Not that, obviously, that's the be all end all for the commission. We have to make our own judgment, but I certainly would be very interested in what the lab say before we make that decision. Yes, Ann.
And when you're getting that information from the lab directors, I'm concerned about our forensic toxicology labs who do dual work in the forensics world and the clinical tox world, where ABFT certified them and they could do both. Under this new model with ANAB forensic lab accreditation taking on ABFT, if you go that route, you're not certified as a clinical tox lab. And that's going to mean a dual effort on the part of the labs that are doing both. It's not the commission's concern, but it certainly would be a lab director's concern. So we need to kind of understand how much this is disrupting those labs that do both. And that's common in our OCME type labs. Onondaga, Westchester. Oh.
Can I just ask one quick question? So, based on the model you're proposing, I'm just curious why anyone would want to do that extra level, just because they're going to have to justify an extra expense, even if it's nominal, and they're going to have to meet additional standards, even if it's, whatever it may be. It seems like when you're going for the foundation and the first floor, moving to that second floor, I think even lab directors might have a hard time convincing their administration for the need of it.
Well, the perspective that ABFT looks at it, and I think a lot of the lab directors, regardless of whether they're in New York State or not, is that 17025 is not a forensic standard in and of itself. The ABFT standards offer a lot more in terms of forensic toxicology of standards that are very relevant to that discipline. And that is why we've had a significant number of labs that have either decided that they really want to go for the ABFT standard, even though technically it's a little more challenging and sometimes, and in more than one or two cases have actually decided to drop 17025 and go with ABFT because they feel the standards are more relevant to the work that they do. Moving forward, obviously, 17025, as you said, is going to be the platform, the main platform. And with ANAB, it'll be with the ANAB standards in addition. So I think as far as that is concerned, the forensic toxicology laboratories that are currently ABFT accredited recognize the value of that standard, basically. It's very relevant to what they do on a day-to-day basis.
And it may well be in addition to, we're going to have to decide as a commission whether or not we feel that it's keep those as well. So.
Can I comment, please?
Sure.
I'm sorry. I've had the ASPED legacy and we changed and then we also had ABF. I think as a lab director, our concern is going to be those additional 1702 requirements, which is what Scott was bringing up, because we haven't seen them yet, and we work very hard with the ABFT requirements because they are very science oriented. I mean, they're very detailed of what we have to do or how we have to do that work. So our fear as a director is going to be, what are these 1702 requirements, and do we have enough staff to do that? That's our bigger fear. I don't think your ABFT labs are going to want to get rid of the ABFT requirements because they are very oriented, similar to your DNA requirements that are very detailed. That's important, especially in the field now. So the hard part's going to be 17025.
You say you haven't seen those yet. Those standards are out there and published, the 17025 standards, right?
But we haven't seen how ANAB and ASCLD Lab are going to put them together, requirements for the laboratories. Now, I haven't purchased them yet.
The 17025 standards are out there, right?
Yes, they are. In fact, the 2017 version of 17025 was published last week.
And when you say publish, do you have to buy those? Or is that...
Yes, you do.
All right. So, we want to get input from our labs, our forensic toxicology labs, and for them to give us meaningful feedback, I think they have to be able to see and understand what those guidelines are. In order to do that, they're going to have to go on and buy them.
They will have to purchase. ANAB actually has to purchase them as well.
What's the cost?
I would want to say it's maybe around like $160 or something.
About $150 maybe?
Yeah, you can get them from online at ANSI.org. ANSI.
All right.
And we, Scott, to assist you with, communicating with the lab directors, we have a couple things that we're in the process of developing. One is a crosswalk between the ABFT requirements and the 17025-2005, so what labs are currently accredited to show, and the ANAB additional supplemental requirements, so you can see where all those things line up and which ones are covered by the ABFT requirements and which ones aren't. We are also currently in the process of doing a very similar type of crosswalk with the 17025 version, or 2005 version of 17025 and the 2017 version, because the 2017 version of 17025 is completely restructured. And so the numbering's going to change on everything, which means ANAB is going to have to renumber our accreditation requirements in yet another document. So we're trying to get all that ready so that, early next year, laboratories who are wanting to transition, because we do have the transition deadline of December 31st, 2018, to transition to those new ANAB accreditation requirements. If you choose to jump right to the 2017 version of 2005, of 17025, all these numbers are confusing. So if you want to go the 2017 version as opposed to the 2005, we want to make that available to you so you don't have to transition twice. So we are in the process of working on that as well. So when you get your communications going, I'm happy to provide you whatever information.
Because you said that the deadline for the A&B supplemental requirements, the A&B requirements, that's December 31st, 2018. 17025, the 2017 version, you'll you'll assess them on that. Do you have a deadline for the 2017?
We don't have a deadline yet
Okay.
for the 2017 transition. It'll be at least a couple years out.
Right, so it won't be
before-
December 31st, 2018?
No, it will not be
Yeah.
any time next year.
Okay.
No.
So is it fair to say by 2020, it would be 17025, 2017 edition?
Yes.
The ANAB requirements and the ANAB ABFE requirements?
Yes.
Now, those crosswalks you referred to, can you provide those to the commission when you finish them?
Oh, absolutely. And we also put them on our website.
But suffice it to say that regardless of the accreditation program, they're all going to have the foundation of 17025.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Mike, could you also ask the lab directors for input on the cost implications? So comparing the cost of accreditation under the old ABFT ASCLD system versus going forward and the implications of the changes. I mean, it might be useful to know and have an idea of what New York State is spending towards accreditation in evaluating programs to see if we're getting value for that amount of money.
Scott, is that something you can?
Yeah, that's something we can definitely look at. I think probably more is going to be the cost of what they need to meet those requirements, rather than the cost of the assessment. I think the answer is I should probably get both, from the lab directors, even if it's a ballpark figure, but a figure that we could at least see what they think would need to meet the base 17025, and we could base it upon what our current accreditation fees are now. I think we could say that. Or
Yeah, and I can help you with that.
Okay.
But you're looking at, to add the ABFT requirements, we already send a toxicology assessor if it's a 17025 accredited lab. So we're looking at, we might need an extra day to do the ABFT checklist in addition. So it's not a substantial cost increase, but we would need an amount of extra time
Sure.
to add on to the assessment team that we would already be sending in.
Is the ABFT current time frame for accreditation every 2 years?
Yes.
Is it going to change with the changeover to ANAB?
I think it's fair to say that there would be some kind of assessment, on-site assessment every 2 years. I
It'll
think that's
still
what
be
we
every 2
discussed.
years.
Yeah, that's kind of something that ABFT is really going to, I think, have the final say in, because they are remaining ABFT. That's their standard. That's not ANAB's set of requirements. And so, if the decision is that every 2 years still, then when we go in and do our surveillance visit,
I mean, you'd be able to expand the surveillance
we'd be
visit
there-
anyway.
Yeah, so we would just
coordinate that.
make sure a toxicology assessor went along and assessed those ABFT
Well,
discipline
I was
specific
only bringing that
requirements.
up from a cost implication, so it would be every 2 years there would be this extra
I think the extra, it sounds like to me, the extra cost to our current lab that is not ABFT is minimal. But I don't know how much ABFT costs to do an assessment now compared to what ANAB does. So I think that's the two numbers we don't have at the moment that we just need to know, and that would be the true cost. But I think, like I said, the bigger cost is going to be them building the foundation in the first floor. That's the bigger cost. How are they going to build it rather than have the cost of having the building inspector come in? I can't believe I'm using your analogy.
Shelby's analogy.
Oh, thank you. I'm still glad I'm using
Makes you feel better, doesn't it?
Yours.
It was yours?
It's a good analogy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very concrete.
No pun intended. All right, well, anyone else have any questions?
I just have a more immediate one. So we've talked a lot about the future stuff, but just in the interim during this transition period, the commission is now considering the different accrediting bodies, and I'm just wondering, would ABFT have any objection if there's additional New York standards that are put on top of what you currently do?
New York is free to do that. They may or may not be part of the ABFT standard, and I don't want to be argumentative in saying that. If it seems reasonable that it's a reasonable standard that should be added, then I don't think there'd be any fundamental objection.
So first of all, thank you to all of you for the information. Certainly appreciate the advance notice. What I would suggest is that we put this on the agenda for our next meeting, I don't know, it's February, when's it?
March.
Our March meeting, specifically for, first of all, feedback from the lab directors through Scott with regard to the issues that we've raised. And then secondly, for, hopefully we'll have that crosswalk information by then as well. And if we do, discussion among the commission members as to, what we see as a path forward here. Anyone have any alternative thoughts or objections to that course? All right, then we'll add this to the agenda for our next meeting. Appreciate your help with this. And again, thank you. Appreciate you being here and appreciate the information.
Thank you.
Next item we have on our agenda under old business, it's letter B is familial search. At our last meeting, there was a request from some members of the commission to see the notice of adoption regarding familial search that was published in the state register. That's been provided in the binders. I think it's pages 206 to 209.
Mike?
Yes.
Have there been any requests to seek a familial search since the notice of adoption?
Yes, we've received 7 requests. I believe all of them have been on either homicide and or rape or combinations of the two cases, and all of them are pending right now.
Thank you.
Yes, Mary.
Are all 7 of those cases are homicides?
They're either rape
or
homicide or rape and homicide.
And the cases that requests have been made for are those where all other avenues of exhaustion have been made or not?
Question, none of the applications have been ruled on yet.
Okay.
So as part of the process, those are things that have to be decided.
And have they come, are they on your desk? Because the process, as I understand it, all ends up in front of you.
Yes, the state police have a role at different parts of the process. We have a role, so I couldn't say every single one of them is with me as opposed to with the state police at this very moment, but they are all in the process. There have been no decisions made with regard to any of those 7.
And did any of the 7 involve, in cases where you've been involved, because you're the chair of this commission, involves forensic labs, have there been presentations made to you?
No.
They've been submitted?
Yes.
I see. So let me go back to what we discussed at the time we went through this long debate. First question I had was we were going to develop forms. Have those forms been developed at all?
Yes.
Have they been published here?
They're on the DCGS website. So they're in a public forum, the actual application with all the facets of it.
Okay. And those forms will reside where?
The DCJS website.
The completed forms, you
The
mean?
completed forms. In other words, I'm a prosecutor. I go through the process. We've exhausted everything. This is a very bad homicide. We think this person's at large. We've got to solve this. It gets to your desk. I filled out the
DCJS
form. My
will
question is, where is the
certainly-
form?
The DCJS will certainly keep a copy of anything that we get in connection with these applications.
Okay, so, and has DCJS, as opposed to the commission, taken a position that if a case, somebody's arrested as a result of this process, the case goes before the courts, these forms will be available as part of discovery?
We have not taken a position. Obviously, we haven't ruled on any. There haven't been any cases yet, but we
Right.
certainly would comply with any lawful direction.
Like a subpoena?
Any law, court order, subpoena, whatever it might be.
Right. And where would that court order or subpoena be directed? To you as the head of DCJS or head of the commission? I'm just trying to.
Certainly,
My
if it-
concern
if
always
it
has
came
been.
to me, it would get
Right.
directed to our legal department ultimately, and would be handled appropriately.
Right. And at this stage, are you satisfied
As
that?
long as I'm still the head of DCJS.
Right.
If I move on, you have to direct it to somebody else.
Well, that's of course one of the things we raised as one of the issues. It's very personality driven. Let me ask you this: are you satisfied, just from the requests, that we're going along the lines that we're told to us as a commission in debate, that these would be exceedingly rare that we would get these requests?
Yes, with the caveat that we have not passed or ruled on any of the applications.
Right.
So, I think that's part of, that's part of the process. Clearly the applications to me indicate that the spirit of where we wanted to go, was heard. And the second part of that, I think, is making sure in the decision-making process that we also carry out the spirit of that.
And the requests to date, not ruled upon, that are just before you, are they spread out amongst different DA's offices all over the state?
They certainly don't come from one office. I don't. I feel uncomfortable giving information out that could potentially identify
Right, I don't want you to do that.
where they came from at this point. So I'm not
The
comfortable saying
real
what's-
thrust of my question is, did you get like 7 from one office?
No.
Or 5 from one office? That's what.
I don't have that breakdown in front of me, but they didn't all come from one office.
Okay.
Mike, what's the status of the training programs?
Right, well, good point.
So the training program, the way the whole process works is, once an application has been approved, which these applications aren't at that stage yet, then a memorandum of understanding is executed. After the memorandum of understanding is done, then the actual search occurs, and then prior to the release, that's when the training occurs. So the training's in development right now between DCJS and the state police. So it's a little ways down the line still.
And obviously, the training would be directed for future requests.
Yeah, any request, actually. Any
Well,
request would go through it.
No results will be released in any case until the people who the results are going to be released to go through
trained.
their training.
Right.
So even with the current 7, the other issue as a practical matter is, even if tomorrow all 7 were approved, I don't believe that we're at a point where the actual searching is ready to take place.
Right.
So, there's 7 applications pending. Nothing's going to happen tomorrow, but before anything is released, that training program will be done, and whoever the results are going to be released to will be trained.
Yep. Now, in the future, with respect to these requests, when a decision is made to go forward, sign the memorandum, and do the training, and do the search, will the commission be notified?
Yeah, I anticipate, and I think it would be a good idea, similar to what we do with partial match.
Right. That's
to
really what my question is.
keep the commission informed. And what we have to do is strike a balance between letting the commission know what's happening and not providing information that identifies specific cases. But yes, we will keep the commission updated, in terms of how many applications,
Right.
how many approved, how many where results have actually been released.
Now, the partial match, the way we were doing that was announced to the DNA sub. Am I correct? Is that going to be different this time around with this?
I'm fine providing a level of information I just referred to this commission on a regular basis.
I definitely would ask for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
this has come through us. There's been heavy debate about it. I'm
No
extremely
objection.
nervous and skeptical to begin with about the whole process. And you know from the tenor of my questions, I'm very concerned about this all going on behind closed doors, where the forms are going to be, whether any of this will see the light
Those are
of
on the
day.
public website, the form itself, obviously not the completed.
Okay, so I think it's really important that the commission know.
I will put it on, we'll put it on an agenda item at every meeting.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. All right, I think that concludes old business. So I think the next thing we have is laboratory disclosures. Brian, do you want to take us through the lab disclosures?
Sure. The first laboratory is the Erie County Toxicology Laboratory. Documents on page 210 to 211 of your binder. That's a proficiency test issue, and the lab director is available via telephone if you have any questions. Okay. Next laboratory is the Monroe County Crime Laboratory. Documents in your binder starting on page 212 to 214. The director's in the Albany location if there's any questions.
Who's up in Albany?
Kathy, would you be able to bring John up?
Yeah. But no, this is the forensic tox lab.
Oh, you want for Erie?
No.
No.
Monroe.
Monroe.
Oh, I jumped one. I'm sorry.
It's on
That's
page
twice I did that.
212, is that where we're at?
Disregard, I jumped one.
Wait, no, maybe you're right. Yeah, I'm sorry, I read it wrong.
Have the Monroe,
Yeah, that,
This is the Monroe County Crime Lab?
Yep.
Okay, so my apologies, it is John.
so Marvin, did you have a question for the Monroe County Crime Lab?
Yeah, this is one on page 212.
Yes, that's the right one, and you have John Clark and Elaine Calhoun in Albany.
Ellen.
Ellen?
Ellen. Good morning.
Good morning.
So the document in front of me said that there were 2 presumptive tests for blood and human blood. Can I just get an explanation, short and brief, why 2 presumptive tests were done or not done? What happened? How did it happen? Yeah.
So the analyst performed a presumptive test for blood on a particular item, and then she also performed hemotrace, which is also considered a presumptive test for blood. That is why you see presumptive listed twice.
Mm-hmm. So there were 2 presumptive tests.
Yes.
In your lab, do you do a confirmatory test for blood besides a presumptive test?
We do not.
The test that you do that's presumptive for blood, what is the problem with the test that it's only presumptive? Is there a possibility of a false positive?
Phenolphthalein is the first presumptive test that we perform that is a screening test. Hemotrace has been taken off the confirmatory test because of its cross-reactivity with ferret blood. It's no longer considered a confirmatory test for human blood.
So what I'm trying to figure out is if you just do a presumptive test for blood in a given case and you go no further, that's all you do with respect to blood samples submitted to your lab in Monroe County. Is that correct?
If the presumptive test is positive for blood, that sample may go on for DNA analysis.
It may,
But there would be
or it
no
must.
further screening test.
I'm
Pardon?
sorry? It
I
may
apologize,
or
I
it
talked over
must?
you. It may.
Okay. What would be the criteria which would govern the decision may or must?
Case specifics, if I have multiple blood stains that were presumptive test positive, I may not test all items for DNA, but perhaps a representative of those stains for DNA.
Mm-hmm.
Would it also depend on whether or not anyone requested DNA testing?
Yes.
Well, who might be in your lab a customer that would require the additional DNA testing? A defense attorney? Prosecutor?
Either or, law enforcement, prosecution, and we've had instances where defense has requested additional testing and we've performed it.
What would be the criteria for a must decision where you got a presumptive test, positive for blood, and you decided we're definitely going to do DNA? What are the protocols in your lab or the criteria for doing a must for further testing?
I apologize. I guess I'm not understanding the line of questioning that I'm getting in regards to this action. I'm not sure how it plays into the action. Could you help me?
I was caught on this because of the term presumptive tests for blood. My own experience here on the commission is that when there's a presumptive test for blood, there's usually a confirmatory test. And I didn't see anything about confirmatory tests, so my question's about the procedures in the lab. That's the line of questioning.
Confirmatories.
They're on them.
Some react with
Right.
advanced primates and ferrets for the ones that
Right. Well, I understand the ferret reaction. That's well documented. What I'm trying to figure out is that you indicated where you do presumptive tests, you may do DNA testing, or you will do DNA testing. You've explained the discretionary decision. I'm just asking, what are the criteria where you have a case, you do the blood testing, it's presumptive, it comes out that if you get a positive reaction, you decide we're going to do the DNA testing. What are the criteria that cause that to happen?
If it's requested, case specific, and obviously if it's the only stain in a case and it's presumptive test positive, that would be tested. That would be a must.
Is that the only scenario you can think of? Or that
At
you've
this
had in
time-
your experience?
At this time, yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions?
I just want to clarify that as far as this is concerned, this is only dealing with the specific issue of a presumptive test statement, and it wasn't going any further about any sort of DNA testing that may or may not have happened for this particular sample,
Correct.
though.
That's
This is
correct.
just addressing this statement, the extra statement about another presumptive test that wasn't performed.
That's
Yes.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify, I'm sorry. There were 2 tests performed. It's just the statement says that human blood was tested, and you cannot make that statement anymore, correct?
No, what happened was the analyst performed phenolphthalein on a particular test, on a particular item. The report went out that she performed basically phenolphthalein and hemotrace when hemotrace was not performed.
So it just should have said presumptive testing for blood was positive. That's it.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right, the next laboratory is the Monroe County Toxicology Laboratory. In your binders, page 215 through 218, you have representatives of that lab available if there's any questions. Okay, the next laboratory is the Nassau County Medical Examiner's Forensic Science Division, page 219 to 224 of your binders, and also in materials that you have recently handed out, not in the binder, 224.1 to 224.2. And we have members of that laboratory obviously here if available, if there's any questions. Okay, the next laboratory is the New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner, Department of Forensic Biology, pages 225 to 231 of your binders. This is kind of an anomaly because this isn't something the Commission would normally see, but due to the root cause law, it comes in, so it's actually a issue that was with a different part of the OCME, not the Forensic Biology Laboratory, but it's detected in there. Next laboratory is the New York City Police Department Laboratory, pages 232 to 234. Again, representatives of that lab are here if there is questions. Next laboratory is the New York State Police Crime Laboratory, pages 235 to 242 of your binders. And 3 separate things they're available to talk to you about. Representatives of that lab in Albany if you need. Next laboratory is the Onondaga County Center for Forensic Sciences. There is an initial notification on something, and a member of that laboratory is available via phone if necessary. And the last laboratory is the Westchester County Division of Forensic Science, pages 249 to 253 of your binder. And again, we have members of that laboratory here in the room if there are questions.
I just have a couple of quick questions on that. I don't know who I should address them to.
So this is on Westchester 249 to 253.
Forgive my ignorance. Could you explain the smoothing process?
Yes, I'm Elaine Schwartz, the technical leader of the forensic biology section.
Hi, Elaine.
Hi. Smoothing is one of the options in the GeneMapper IDX software that has to do with how the data points are connected, and it affects the peak morphology and the peak height.
Okay. What effect does setting? What
May I
exactly?
clarify it for you, Fitzy?
I got it. I'm smoothed out.
Well, if I start asking her follow-up questions, I look stupid. So
I just figured I would be the one.
Rather than remove all doubt.
There's a number of us hoping you'll ask follow-up questions.
Why don't you try that one more time?
Okay. It's a option in the software that we use when we process our DNA runs that determines, it connects the data points. There's 3 different options that you can use. There's an option called none, there's an option called light, and there's an option called heavy. And depending on which option you use, it controls the height of the peaks in our electropharograms.
Okay. How do you make the decision whether to use non-heavy or light? And I assume that's a setting?
Yes, it is. It's a setting in the analysis method editor window in the software. The recommended setting is the one in the middle, light.
Okay.
Well, does it produce different results?
The effect that it has is the peak heights. If you use none, the peak heights are a little bit higher than if you used light. And then if you used heavy, the peak heights are even lower. So the light option is right in the middle.
Why would you want?
Yeah, why would you want these different options?
It's just part of the software.
Part of the software.
Yes.
Right, and because the software comes to you, right, from outside the lab.
Correct.
By developers.
Depends on how you like your peaks.
Yes.
Right? And you just make a decision, this looks like the right software package for us.
Well, we do a validation.
You do a validation.
Yeah, and we use the recommended, from the company, the recommended thing is to use light.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So back to Scott's question, which is, there are 3 settings. None, light, and heavy. And we have these 3 because?
Well, you got to understand too, these instruments are used beyond the forensic laboratory. They're used in research. So some applications, for example, I guess if you'd have very dirty samples that are not cleaned up to the level that we do in the forensic laboratory.
Right.
We use, the magnetic bead technology gives you very clean samples. In some other technologies where they're doing maybe pharmaceuticals or whatever, the samples might be very dirty. They might need to use very a larger smoothing setting.
Heavy.
I'm making that assumption.
Okay.
They're not. These instruments aren't only used in forensic setting. They're used.
I got you.
We would actually make up a very small portion of their.
Would it be wrong just to leave it at light and no discretion involved in the examiner?
That's what we did our validation using the light smoothing.
For forensic use.
Yes.
And what happened was...
Has a reanalysis resulted in any different results in any cases?
Most of the profiles, the results do not change. In some of the profiles where the peaks are around our analytical threshold, very close to the analytical threshold, if they were processed with none and the peaks were called, if you reprocess them with the light smoothing, the peaks drop below the threshold.
And the effect of that would be
It doesn't get called in the final profile. That
something is left out.
Yes.
So what happens, what we've been seeing is the statistic changes a little bit. In some cases, it changes a little bit. The conclusion, the actual match conclusions don't change. If we said this matches that, that's not changing. We're not seeing that. But what will happen is an allele may drop out, or maybe a loci will drop out. That will change the statistic. But we're also working with you. I mean, I can't even, these numbers are so astronomically high, like 21 zeros, 30 zeros, that the change is not that great in terms of the overall thing. So what we did initially was we checked to see, had we ever testified on any cases with this setting set to none. We hadn't testified on any cases. We then reached out and looked, had we done any grand juries? We identified 6 grand jury cases that we looked at. We looked at those, and I believe only, one of them needed to be reprocessed.
There was one that required an amended report.
Then we looked at any disclosure or Rosario packages we had sent out. And those, what was that?
There were 2 that required amended.
The conclusions aren't changing on these. The statistics are changing on them. So we reported this all to the district attorney's office. We're putting a note in every single case where we're doing the reprocessing so that it's very obvious that this is part of a corrective action. So everyone will know what's going on. In fact, I've directed our guys to put an actual colored sheet in each of the case jackets, so it's not going to kind of get lost in the white of like a 300-page disclosure package. It actually is going to have a color to it.
So there was an amended report because while the conclusion didn't change, the statistic changed.
That's correct.
So if you were presenting this in court, right, the original statistic might be different from the amended statistic. And the way that might play out in front of a jury is it helps a defendant or it hurts a defendant.
It could go either way.
It could go either way, right? So it's important. That's why it's a colored sheet of paper and an amended report.
But there was no case where you did a reanalysis and an inclusion went to an exclusion.
Can I just make a point? Nothing was reanalyzed, correct? It was reprocessed.
We reprocessed.
Yeah, so just sometimes people take the terminology, like they re-look at the sample, they just look at the
With
data.
the data, we just reprocessed it using the other computer set.
If I understand you, depending on where you have this setting, assuming everything works properly, if you move the setting, you shouldn't see a peak that you saw at one point on a light setting, for example, show up at a different point on the heavy. It's just a question of whether or not that peak is tall enough, strong enough, whatever you want to say, for you to be able to report it.
Correct. It's going to drop.
All right. And when you reran these, you didn't see a peak. I'm sorry. When you reprocessed, you didn't see a peak in a spot that you never saw a peak before. It was just whether or not the peak was strong enough or high enough, whatever you want to say, for you to be able to report it.
Correct.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Back to you.
Right, I believe that is everything on the agenda with the exception of the executive session. So what I would suggest is that we, well, first of all, do I have a motion to go into executive session to discuss matters relating to either a current or potential investigation or matters that may lead to appointment, promotion, demotion, discipline, or suspension of a particular person? I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Right. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. All right, so I'd suggest we take a 5-minute break and convene an executive session in 5 minutes.
Wait for that. No.
You said she's sick, Gina?
No.
Jackie, there's no one out there?
It's good now. Know if they could head out, but
She's not going to be working.
They can if they want. They're welcome to come or
She's going what?
stay here.
She will not be
I'm
working
waiting to
with
hear
the
back from
commissioner.
Geo still.
We don't get to.
Who's that?
Sold that.
Sorry.
Who's not working with?
That's this new one.
All right, are we?
Send me down to.
Not quite yet.
Are we back? Are we back?
Yes,
No,
yep,
no, no.
good.
Yes. Horses are
Yeah.
down to. How many horses do you have now?
And that microphone has to go on.
Rolling?
Oh, I know.
This is on.
I was met at the door this morning by one that's not mine.
We just confirm we're live on the whatever we are.
Yes, sir.
We are recording?
Yes.
All right, we're back in regular session. We did take a vote in executive session, and we voted to send a copy of a letter that the commissioners received from the DNA subcommittee dated December 4th to the Inspector General and to copy ANAB and the OCME on that letter. And with that exception, we did not take any other action in executive session. So with that noted, any other business? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Yes. All in favor?
Aye. And have a great holiday.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
I think it bears repeating. I know the issues sometimes are difficult that we discuss, and we have divergent viewpoints, but I certainly, and I think all of us appreciate the hard work that everyone does. So thank you to everybody around the table.
Thanks, Mike.
Appreciate your work.
Appreciate yours.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
Sorry, dude.